Two questions are asked in politics. Who governs to what ends? If you can answer these two questions, looking at a particular nation, you can describe the type of government within that nation. So let's look at some of them. Dictatorship is rule by one person who has taken control by usually controlling the military, controlling the secret police, severely restricting individual liberties, so forth. Historical examples, of course, include Adolf Hitler and Mussolini. During World War II, Muammar Gaddafi in Libya, Fidel Castro in Cuba, and today you could look at North Korea and Kim Jong-il. Democratic centralism is a type of dictatorship whereby the dictator allows the people to vote, but in this case, primarily for the Communist Party, because they know what's best for the people, thereby severely restricting choices for the people, but there's a sham in allowing them to vote. An oligarchy is ruled by the few. Examples would include Sparta. In ancient Greece, Athens was the birthplace of democracy. Sparta had an oligarchy, two kings, one controlling domestic policy, the other taking the Spartan army off to war within the Greek region during the Persian Wars and such. The Soviet Union had 9 people controlling all policy making in the Soviet Union, so you could look at the Soviet Union post Joseph Stalin as being an oligarchy. A monarchy is ruled by one person, king or queen, by virtue of hereditary right, a God-given divine right of kings, primarily during the Middle Ages in Europe. The closest we have to an absolute monarchy today would be the sheiks of Saudi Arabia, who pass down power to their children, and they have absolute control within Saudi Arabia. Don't confuse a monarchy with a constitutional monarchy, which many nations have, England, Jordan as examples. Those constitutional monarchies severely limit the power of the king or the queen because of a constitution. Aristocracy means rule by the landowners. You have to own land in order to make and take part in policy making. You can look at the United States government in our early days when you had to be white, male, and a landowner in order to vote as being an aristocracy. Plutocracy is different from an aristocracy because it extends policy-making abilities to those with material wealth besides just landowners. In Monaco today, for an example, you have to have a certain income, a certain liquid assets in order to vote. What you actually live in is a indirect representative democracy, better known as a republic. United States, Mexico, German Federated Republics, Japan. In each of those, you have a legislative body, Congress in the United States, Bundestag in Germany, Diet in Japan, the Knesset in Israel. Those are law-making bodies that represent the, and therefore they are republics. Because in the strictest sense of the term, democracy is where policy is directly controlled by the people, by the electorate. Closest we've had in our history are New England town meetings in the early 1700s in our colonial history. Switzerland comes close today because in Switzerland the Swiss people have to agree to any tax increase that that their legislative body may try to impose. The only reason I mention anarchy is because it's brought up as the absence of government, chaos. But anarchy never exists amongst a group of people. Somebody always ends up taking control, setting up some type of government, and therefore they end up with a dictatorship, an aristocracy, a plutocracy, a democracy, whatever the case might be. Theocracy is important to understand in today's world because it means rule by religious leaders. Examples would include Iran today, the Taliban when they controlled in Afghanistan before the war, but of course they're trying to take control back. Muslim Indonesia, where you have again the Muslim clerics, the imams, are controlling policymaking within those nations. In Iran, Ahmadinejad may think that he's actually president, but in actuality, the imams control policymaking. Of concern, of course, is Al-Qaeda, the terrorist organization's intent to create an empire and rule by the Quran. That would be an example of a theocracy. I mentioned Peterke with tongue-in-cheek because many of you who are parents, this is what you actually have in your household, where children are controlling policy makings within a government body. I know that Peterke existed in my household when my boys were still here before they went off to college. Adhocracy is a type of government which may exist in the future. Robert H. Waterman advances the notion that radical capitalism and government controlled by corporations may be the result of the worldwide information revolution with the internet. It'll break down all barriers, political barriers among nations. Finally, looking at a term I want you to understand, pluralism, which means governance by competing groups and special interests. Special interests today would include, for example, the American Association of Retired Persons, AARP, the Heritage Foundation, Trout Unlimited, ad infinitum of different special interest groups, what James Madison in the Federalist Paper number 10 called fact that are competing within the marketplace of ideas. They are working within the elections to try to control policy making. Robert Dahl in the 1950s and 60s expressed this idea in his book, Who Governs? And looking at what you actually have in the United States, and in my humble opinion, I agree that you have pluralism, competing groups, all looking to try to control policy. But no one particular group will ever have enough control. Therefore, you have the marketplace of ideas and elections control.